continue with the event online until such time as we could rearrange the face-to-face networking breakfast event, which we also hope to see you then. While we are disappointed to have lost the immediate opportunity for valuable face-to-face networking, we are excited that it means that so many people can join us from around the country, if not around the world. I would like to acknowledge the chair of the International River Foundation, Professor Paul Greenfield, and some of our board directors who are actually here and joining us today. So before I hand over to our speakers and Jackie to introduce our speakers, can I just give you 3 housekeeping notes, please? So you would have received the information from Sylvia that we have set this up that you're all on mute with no video. Could I please ask that you remain on mute without video unless you're asked to speak? This is so we could avoid any noise interference, or also we don't slow down any of the connections, because we actually have a number of people joining us today. Secondly, can I please ask that you check how your name appears on your profile? This is very important, that your full name appears so that we could see who you are and acknowledge you in our discussions. So it's very easy to change your name, hover over your profile. For those who have not done so yet, click on the 3 dots on the top right and select rename and of course put your name. Third, if you have any questions or comments later on or through the presentation, we would like you to or you would like to share any documents or information, can I please encourage you to add it to the group chat? So the group chat is in the bottom part of your panel, and this is what we will use to drive our Q&A session as well as our general discussion sessions today. We will try to address all the comments in order, of course, time permitting. So this is our first online event, so I hope you will all bear with us, and we really hope we could make this run as smoothly as possible. So our topic for today's RiverTalk, is a highly relevant and important topic. It's a topic we are naming Rivers on Fire. With so much happening in the world right now, it is easy to forget that the devastating impacts that the Australian bushfires had on our communities was just fairly recently. It was over the summer 2019-2020, so that was just a few months ago, right? So we have created this Rivers on Fire series to ensure that the wonderful work that has already started on the ground continues, and we continue to investigate the impacts of fires on our rivers and their ecosystems. But more importantly, later on, is a call for action for our rivers. So we are featuring 2 very important and amazing keynote speakers for today, Bradley Moggridge and Professor Fran Sheldon. This RiverTalk will focus on understanding the impacts, raising awareness, and creating a call for action to address the effects of fire on our waterways. Following each of our speakers, we will have a short 5-minute question and answer session that Jackie will facilitate. And then it will also be followed by a longer 20-minute discussion session at the conclusion of their presentations. So with that, can I please hand over to Jackie to introduce our 2 speakers. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Eva. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all join us today, and it's my real pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Bradley Moggridge. Bradley is a proud Murray from the Kamilaroi Nation, northwest New South Wales. His career and university qualifications have been focused around Aboriginal people and water. He finds himself in a unique position of being trained in Western science with a cultural background, and he will share some of that experience today. Please feel free to ask your questions via the chat function, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Bradley.
G'day everyone. There we go. That's me. All right, I might get straight into this. Thanks for having me, everyone. All the attendees online, the organisers, International River Foundation, sponsors, and obviously Dr. Fran. Great to be, or Professor Fran, I should say. It's an honour to talk alongside you, and obviously I'm here representing University of Canberra and the Centre for Applied Water Science. So I'll talk today about Aboriginal cultural values and knowledge and fire and water. Look, I'm not a fire expert, but fire and the methodologies around Indigenous knowledge are very similar to what I've been experiencing in water, and I think there's a chance for us to learn from both, from our people. So this is who I am. Yama to everyone on your respective countries. I'm Kamilaroi man, Northwest New South Wales. This is why I do what I do, is for the generations to come and the generations that have passed, to try and let's say leave a legacy if I can, and make this a better place, especially in the water stakes. Rivers of Fire, I didn't really know how to start this, let's say. There's obviously the banner. That's the impacts after fire, and you can sort of sense that there's a lot of impacts out there on country that are unprecedented, as we keep hearing. That word seems to be the buzzword of this generation, but I think it's a real time to step up, I suppose.
Brad, can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yep.
I don't see your screen. Are you sharing your screen at the moment?
Oh, damn it! Am I?
Can anyone else?
Hang on.
Eva, can you see?
No, I can't.
No.
No, neither can
Here we
I.
go. Here we go.
Awesome.
That's
Thank
it.
you.
That's better, Brad.
Oh, there we go. Technology, eh? Hey, I'll go back. I'll go back one. See if I can. So yeah, that's my mob. As I mentioned, why I do what I do, for them, the future, and obviously the ones that have gone before me and laid the foundation and given me these opportunities to be a voice. Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Kamilaroi, and I'm always keen to promote them. I can't represent Aboriginal Australia. I wouldn't dare do that. I can only talk on behalf of my elders if I have permission. As I mentioned, that's the talk, that's the impacts post-fire, and obviously water quality and is a big issue once we finish fires. That's a river on fire. It's probably some famous YouTube footage of a member of Parliament, and that's actually a river of fire, let's say, Kilauea. So I was sort of thinking about how I could sort of frame this talk, and there's those opportunities that are happening. There's that challenge of the Condamine, but also the knowledge that Indigenous people have of past events. And there's some recent papers around rivers of fire that link to traditional knowledge and lava flows around 7,500 years ago in Australia. So that's really cool. Australia seems to only respond to a crisis. We've had the 1,000 kilometres of blue-green algae back in the day, and we got the National Water Initiative. We had the mega drought recently. We're still in drought. We shouldn't relax there. I know COVID-19 and fires have taken precedence, but we're going to be in drought again, no doubt. And that's straight after the Millennium Drought. Is this the new normal, or species extinctions? We've got the review of the EPBC Act happening right now, so chance to have your say. And also coral bleaching after coral bleaching, but there's some out there that say, what bleaching? It's business as usual. Unfortunately, the millions of dead fish. We've got the national native fish recovery strategy happening right now. There's an opportunity to make a difference. I'm lucky enough to sit on the expert panel for that. And then we had the devastating fires, of course, and they're going to keep happening unless we change the way we do business. And they're those two acronyms. One is the National Bushfire Recovery Agency, and the other one is the Wildlife and Threatened Species Bushfire Recovery Expert Panel. So it's a mouthful. So the expert panel, we're lucky to have Dr. Stephen Van Leeuwen, who's a Noongar man. He's sitting on that, and a couple other threatened species legends, Sarah and John. So it's things are happening in response to these fires. The National Bushfire Recovery Agency looks to be only a bucket of money, but I suppose the expert panel is the way we can try and have influence to make changes. when will Australia give us a go? You know, I don't know if anyone saw Victor Stephenson on the ABC Australian Story the other week, and you know, one of his key lines was "Give Aboriginal people a go." I think that's a fair call in this day and age. And I think, you know, when we think back to day one in the colony, any chance you could show us how to find food and water. So, you know, they were seeking knowledge from day one, but that knowledge request stopped. And I think it's time to give us a chance. Culture for me is who I am, my mob, respect, always learning culture, gaining traditional knowledge about who I am and where I'm from and what that means. Language is important, learning it, relearning it. Family is crucial, who we are and how we connect to people, our connection to country as well, and obviously my cultural places and species. Gali is what, you know, is the word for water in Kamilaroi. I'm going to talk a bit about first scientists, you know, traditional knowledge of water and fire. It's not myth and legend, folklore, fable, or even mumbo jumbo. Traditional knowledge is an ongoing understanding of thousands of years of observations of the driest inhabited continent on Earth. Think about that for a sec. You know, I believe we've got something to offer, and it's obviously time to explore that. And you know, I've got the hashtag STEM Original. It's trying to get obviously more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people interested in science. I'm quite biased in the S in STEM, but people don't know what STEM is: science, technology, engineering, and maths. You know, there's some real advancements in women in STEM, which is fantastic to see. But obviously, you know, I'm pushing. I don't really care whether it's man or woman or child that's interested in science. You know, I think it's the right time now to try and get interested and get them focused and give them opportunities. And think about these as career pathways. My old people were the first scientists. This is just your basic scientific setup. And yeah, I believe before science was even a thing, our mob were doing science to survive and access all available resources sustainably. You know, they had the knowledge of country and connected landscapes. You know, that was country itself, fire, the sky, you know, astronomy, species, and water, of course. The method was observation, language, song, dreaming, law. The results were still here. We haven't gone anywhere, and we're not going anywhere. It was a way of being sustainable, adapt and mitigate. And I suppose the conclusion is you know, we're survived, and you know, it's been replicated. Now, some examples, you know, bush foods and medicines tested and retested. When you think about macrozamia, it's a highly toxic plant. It's a huge fruit that's in sandstone country and on the east coast, and you know, it's become a staple of those mobs over many generations. It was high in starch, but when you think about that, that's really is a scientific method of trial and error and replication. Finding and refining water in the driest habited continent on Earth, I think is unbelievable, and that's what excited me to think about water as a career. And if you ain't got any surface water, which is, you know, like the southeast corner or the tropics in the wet season or the coastal regions, you got to know groundwater as well. And I think that knowledge is crucial as well. And then when the rivers stop running, you know, the knowledge of deep water holes comes into play. You know, I think they're called refugia these days, but obviously they were places to get a feed and get water. And obviously wetlands are a key part of our connection to place, and they're important in our knowledge systems. And you know, they are the supermarkets and some points the kidneys of the river systems. This is a map I found while studying my master's thesis on groundwater, and you know, as an old man who was connecting with an anthropologist back in the day, and he gave this anthropologist a spear thrower with these concentric circles on the back and their connection to each other, and they all had an individual name in his language, and the anthropologist had to learn all those names before the old man would give it to him. And what they were, you know, this is in central desert of Australia, so knowing water and these places was important, and each circle was a water hole in this old man's country. And I think that was a that was really exciting, because what it was, you know, when you think about in modern terms, that's a GIS layer. And this was the blueprint for this old man's country and the water holes. So, you know, this is probably 60, 70 years old, that spear thrower, but it has meaning today. Fish traps, obviously, some of the oldest engineered structures on the planet. Sea level rise, coastal people adapting and moving up to higher ground as the sea level rose at the end of the last ice age. So Australian geographer had a series on this. You know, there was a great story around the mobs in Port Phillip Bay having to move up because the sea level kept rising. Fire, those cool mosaic burns, was a key part of the landscape, and obviously a part of the toolbox of caring for country. And, you know, I think Victor on the ABC talked about, you know, right fire for the right country, you know, and that makes a lot of sense. And whether we have different methodologies for different country, and that's fair enough, and that's based around local knowledge. And then obviously navigation and hunting by the stars, the astronomy aspect. Emu in the sky, for me, dinner one in the sky is a big part of our relationship with that species, and emu is a very important species for us. Just have a think about why Australia does not celebrate our knowledge. Now, when you look at that picture by Robert Zooks, he digitized all the, I suppose, the river country in Australia. And, you know, when you look at that, you can sort of see the Murray-Darling Basin in the southeast corner. You can really sort of see, it looks like a set of lungs, and how important they are for the country. And you've got the Lake Eyre Basin, and then you move across the country. And as you move away from the coastal regions and the tropics in wet season, I should add, a lot of these rivers aren't going to be wet at all. So understanding that those places, I think, is really uncelebrated, let's say. Not celebrated, I don't think uncelebrated is a word, let's say. I just made it up. Diversity is a key part of what we are as well. So when you think about, we're just not all Aboriginal people. We are our own individual mob. And, you know, that difference in language, law, landscapes, cultural practice, capacity, status, and governance. There's only sort of a small list of how different we are. Marriage systems, trade, things like that. You know, that diversity is unbelievable, and I think that's the bit that we don't understand. You know, 250 odd plus language groups, and, you know, we all have something to offer. We all understand our country and know our country, and I think that's the bit that needs to change. Culture value fire. Look, as I said, I'm not a fire expert, and I think it's in the law of the land. You know, it'll be in the songs, it's in the dances, the dreaming stories, and of course artworks. You know, unfortunately, recently Aboriginal people have watched their country burn colonial style, and I suppose, where is their fire voice? That voice is starting to be heard, let's say. There's some, I know Oliver Costello, he's on one of the panels, and you know, that's great to see. And, you know, Victor's getting his voice, and there are a number of other people in this space that are actually generating knowledge and opportunities to understand our fire. How our old people use fire, protect and promote species, replicate fires over the landscape, right time, right place, right fire. You know, there were seasonal indicators that determined that. Fire is a form of medicine. I love that line. And country needs it. And obviously people need it as part of their toolkit. And on the right there, you've got the carpet snake. He's one of my totems, so he's always looking over me, protecting me, and I got to protect him as well. These are just some of the stories. So look, if these talks become available, these are hyperlinked, and that's on iView. So, you know, that was Victor talking about the two old men that encouraged him to go around the country and talk fire and traditional knowledge. Fire Sticks Alliance is a group, and as I mentioned, Oliver, but also Victor, a key part of that. And there are a number of members around the country that are building this resource set and running workshops, and the National Indigenous Fire Network and things like that. So there's some really cool things happening. Some more resources in the responses. So the mobs responding to fire, and, you know, there's some Biami Williamson and Jess Weir, and you got Vanessa Kavanagh, who's looking at Aboriginal women's role in fire, and you know she's doing a PhD at the moment, and you know that second story there, she talks about her grandmother being the tree, and when that tree burnt, how she really suffered. And a really cool paper that just come out of ANU. That's the top one, sorry. But yeah, there was another piece in the conversation by Amy, Jess, and Vanessa, and the strength from grief. You know, how can we move forward after these incidents? And of course, fire's arch nemesis is water, but they have to be part of the landscape. And as again, you know, the water is in the lore, it's in the songs, it's in the dances, it's in the dreaming stories. And when you look at a lot of Aboriginal art, water definitely plays a big part of art. You know, how our old people knew water, tell our stories our way about water, how to find and refine water, as I mentioned a bit earlier, the value and protect that water, and then validate that knowledge is our challenge. I suppose our water voice has been missing. And, you know, I've been banging on. There's points in my presentation that have been in my presentations for the last 15 years, maybe even 20 years. And I think it's one day someone will listen. Being impacted by decisions that exclude us, so we don't have a treaty. I had the pleasure of presenting at 4:30 a.m. yesterday morning to the US EPA's Tribal Science Council. You know, they had a council that actually gives advice to the EPA and does projects and has funding. Then you think about New Zealand, they have their own Maori Research Institute. We're far from that here in Australia. We're way behind. We don't have a treaty, we don't have a voice. We're always an afterthought. And what happens beyond the welcome to country or acknowledgement of country is the way I judge things. Reconciliation action plans are a great tool, but if they're no good, I put a C in front of that rap, it becomes a crap. Hearing what we don't have, review after review, Productivity Commission, National Water Initiative reviews, time and time again, there was a lot of copy and paste happening there, but I suppose that's got to change. That non-Aboriginal people telling our stories, there's no disrespect there, but it's time for us to fill that space as well. We're not seen as experts and only storytellers of myth and legend. We're always up the back of reports, policies, and legislation. You'll see acknowledgements up the front, which is great. That's a great step, but we're always up the back. We don't have a national strategy for science, water, fire, astronomy. We don't have a centre of excellence. You know, there's some things that we need to pick up here. And then obviously the government cycles that keep deleting our programs. I've suffered two of those big ones where I thought I was in careers for life, or a job for life, let's say, and that government cycle has changed the way we look at it. These are just some of the resources recently. So Professor Sue Jackson and I had the honour of joining Sue to be co-editor of the Australasian Journal of Environmental Management. It was an Indigenous water special edition, and you know, that had co-led and authors. We had case studies, Aboriginal waterways assessments, Snowy River, Matanjeri values, Fitzroy River, environmental water and Indigenous partnerships. You know, so it was a turning point, especially in this space. And you know, one of the abstracts was written in language from the Kimberley. So that's us filling the space, which is a great feeling. And there's another journal, a special edition, Australasian Journal of Water Resources. And, you know, we're hoping that the river can be a first author in one of those papers. We'll wait and see. My species, these are no-brainers. If the Brolga's turning up on our country and our waterways, that's a good sign. There's a lot of connection to that bird as a let's say a keystone species for us, cultural keystone species. You know, we mimic its dance, we watch it, and we dance it, and we celebrate it. And obviously the wedge-tailed eagle, and I think I've said a number of times that if I ever went into witness protection, my name would be Aquila Audax. I think that's a really cool name. But those species are very important, and as I sort of said, if they're turning up to our waterways, that's a good thing. My methodology is I'm trying to change things in this space, shift the research paradigm. So rather than the Aboriginal people being researched, we become the researchers. My knowledge, I'm always learning. It's about how I relate with people and country, and obviously water as well. But this differs potentially from a Western way of thinking, which is gained and owned individually. Fill the void in water management with Kamilaroi water science. I know that's probably a bit selfish of me, but that's who I am, and I suppose be a voice for Kamilaroi. These are just some resources that are available now as well. Australia New Zealand water quality guidelines. I don't know if people know about them. I joined the Joint Steering Committee back in 2009, I think it was, to create some guidance and build on from the 2000 ANZAC guidelines. And I went over to New Zealand, and so I suppose I was the Indigenous rep, and there was a Maori rep, Roku Mikinui, and he's the iwi from Rotorua, and I was representing Kamilaroi Nation only. And we come up with some principles for water quality and water. And, there was a lot of crossover in our value sets and ideas about water, and they're available there. And then through a subcommittee of the JSC, we come up with some guidelines for implementing cultural and spiritual values, because the previous ANZAC guidelines was really have a chat to an Aboriginal person about water and see what they say. But this gives you, there's sort of no excuse now. I think this gives you an opportunity to think about how you can actually consider and go through a process. And, this is going to be important, especially post-fire landscapes, with water quality being a big issue, and obviously the fish kills. So I think there's a great opportunity. That'll do me. I love water selfies, as you can see. I now have a ISO beard, which has grown from what you can see in those photos. But yeah, look, I'm happy to take some questions when that time comes, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. Love the hashtag STEM Original to share that one around. All right, so we've got some great comments and questions. I'm going to throw some of them at you in the next couple of minutes, but we've only got 5 minutes at this point. I might leave you sharing your screen, if that's okay.
Right, sure.
Then you can refer back to any of your slides if you want to.
Yeah, no worries.
And any that we don't get to now, Eva will refer back to at the end sometime. So Piet Philet says that crisis seems to be a big hook to get decision makers' attention, but everyday people don't want to take that sort of lifestyle. Where is this compelling middle road or narrative and story to get care, stewardship, and make proactiveness the focus?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question, and it's quite relevant, I suppose, to where we're at these days, and especially around Indigenous people entering that space. Storytelling. We are the original storytellers. We are part of this landscape. We know this landscape, and storytelling is a part of that. And that storytelling is a part of that observation, as I mentioned, over thousands of generations. I think if we can actually tell our stories our way, it'd be a good start. And rarely the media obviously has a chance to make that happen as well. We only see the bad stories about Aboriginal people on the screen, and I think some of the good stories that are really coming out on country, the fire stuff is unbelievable. That needs to be shown. The water thing, I'm trying to envelop that into the space. The threatened species stuff, the rangers working on country across Australia. There's these opportunities that we're just sort of going about our business, our custodial responsibilities to care for country. But I think, look, Australia's always been the case, as I mentioned, that we only respond to a crisis, but that middle ground is going to be tough. But I think more and more voices, Aboriginal voices, I think can be a key part of that. And obviously we're going to need our supporters behind us as well to push us along and give us that space. And this is me, I suppose, taking that opportunity to have a voice and own that space and tell my story. So hopefully people have got something out of my story and my journey, and hopefully the challenge ahead is making sure that one little thing is I always remind people is that if you're talking about Aboriginal issues or caring for country or things like that, and there's not an Aboriginal person in the room, you've got to ask that question why. Make sure that they have that opportunity to be in that room, and they're informed, and they're ready to participate in that. I could talk all day. Sorry, I better stop. Thanks for the question, yeah.
That's all right, thank you. Robin Shannon says that, that they're always interested in how closely the Indigenous language group boundaries map onto water catchments.
Yeah, good question. There definitely are relationships between, especially big rivers and boundaries. My mob, Kamilaroi mob up northwest New South Wales, so we sit over the Great Artesian Basin. That's part of our country, so we're in some really cool spring country, but also we've got the McIntyre and the Jumeric and border rivers, and then flows down into the Barwon-Darling. But we do go over that river. So rivers will form, and mountain ranges and things like that will form part of boundaries. But I think there are spaces, and it just depends where your mob sits. You look at the Murray River, and some of those mobs go over, into Mexico or Victoria, I should say. And some are in New South Wales, and some are in both. So it's just a matter of how that mob moved, and how they wanted, and what resources they needed. But yeah, rivers can be a part of boundaries. They're not as distinct as water sharing plans or water resource plans. A number of those plans go over many different language groups. So it's that's a challenge for those states.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've got some other great questions as well, but we might hold off those until the end. Just so everyone knows, Sylvia has been putting all of the links that are in Bradley's presentation into the chat, so you can access those, but you'll also be able to access them at the end of the presentation. All right. So, Bradley, I might get you to stop sharing your screen. Yep. And I'm going to...
Hang on, I need to...
share mine.
Let's see. How do I? There we go.
That's right. I think I stopped you for
All right. Thanks. Good having it, administrator powers.
All right. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Professor Fran Sheldon. Fran is the professor and dean at the Learning and Teaching in the Griffith Sciences group at Griffith University. Her research explores the relationships between hydrology, physical geomorphology and ecology in river systems, particularly large dryland rivers such as those of the Murray-Darling Basin and the Lake Eyre Basin. As previously, please share your questions and comments via the chat function. Fran, we would love it if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen now, please.
Thanks, Jackie. We'll do that.
I might just need to turn mine off, I think.
Yeah, you do.
If I can work out how to do that. It doesn't want to do it. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay, oh, it's all yours, Fran.
Thank you. Let's see if it works. All right. Does it look like it's rivers on fire? Is that what everyone can see?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks to Eva and the International River Foundation for inviting me to come along and have a chat. And that was awesome, Bradley. I'm not quite sure whether my foray into rivers and water quality will match that, but a little bit like Brad, I took a higher level on the thought of fire. So you can see that in the background that river's not actually on fire. It's pretty hot and dry, and hopefully I'm sitting in my, luckily Zoom does these virtual things, I can pretend here that I'm actually sitting out on the banks of the Darling talking to everybody. So pretty cool, and you don't have to see my messy office. So yes, these are real rivers on fire, and I think Brad showed the Condamine River, which, yeah, a bit controversial. It's methane that's on fire there. There is lots of debate about what causes the methane in the Condamine, and we're probably not going to go there in this talk, but methane is pretty common in many aquatic systems. It's not an uncommon gas, but it's, bubbling around in a river system. It's quite interesting. And then, of course, there are some pretty amazing pictures if you go into Google land on rivers that actually did just start to spontaneously combust due to some pretty average water quality in the post-war places around the world. Unfortunately, you know, even though I'm going to talk a bit about catchments today, we've sort of cleaned up a lot of rivers globally, so they don't spontaneously combust quite as often, which is a bit of a relief. So taking it a little bit more broadly, what I wanted to do today was to talk about rivers, the impacts of climate change on their catchments, how rivers are actually part of catchments, and the role of water quality in the end. Because when you go down to the bottom, it's actually water quality within the river system that's actually causing a lot of the death and destruction that you see when things start to go a bit array. So using just two really brief case studies, looking at bushfires and how that actually impacts water quality, and also using droughts, because we've just come through quite a rather severe drought. It looks like it's turning. But, you know, how does drought also impact water quality, and what does that mean for the things that live in rivers? And then at the end, think about what's going to happen in the future if these two things start to increase in their frequency and severity. So just to, you know, put a perspective on why things get so bad in river systems. I mean, river systems are really just the end point of catchments and landscapes. And if you think about it from yourself, they're the veins. They're draining everything out of the catchments down to a sink, which, you know, for many rivers is the sea. For some rivers, it could be a terminal lake, such as Lake Eyre for the Lake Eyre Basin. But in doing that, they sort of accumulate all of the, I guess, any of the things that have happened in the catchment, so erosion, bushfires, and other things. And the little conceptual model, I don't know whether you can see my pointer there, but the conceptual model on the left or the right, my right, really just shows how catchments can then influence things that happen in the river, and then you get down to the biotic processes as well. So there are really strong links between rivers and their catchments. So anything we do in a catchment will impact on the river system. And you can put that into a bit of a conceptual model where, again, we have climate change. If we think about the real big impact, or the real big rivers on fire, getting hotter and hotter, it impacts temperature, both air temperature and then eventually water temperature. It impacts rainfall, and these things through catchment condition impact runoff and eventually water quality. And I could put another little box below that, which was river health, like the health of the plants and animals that live within the river system. And I've put in grey up there anthropogenic impacts, because climate change is an anthropogenic impact in some ways, but there are other things such as catchment clearing, agriculture, and other things that play out into that box, that's catchment condition. So I wanted to just do two quick slides, because I think sometimes people forget just what a weird substance water is, and part of water's weirdness is what causes some of these water quality impacts. So water, H2O, and there we have a little picture, a little graphic of water. It's got, you know, the red ones are our oxygen molecules, and the grey ones are our hydrogen molecules, H2O. The H2O is held together really strongly, but between those little positive hydrogens and the negative oxygen molecules, we get these really weird things called hydrogen bonds. And hydrogen bonds hold all those water molecules together and make water a weird thing that's in a liquid state at most of the temperatures on Earth, which, if you think about it, you can't find too many other substances that are liquid. And if they are, it's usually because they've got water in them. And what this tends to do when you've got water in a river system, or water anywhere really, means that it's why ice floats. It's why it's pretty good to put ice in your drink on a Friday afternoon, because it sits at the top and not at the bottom, and that's pretty cool. But if you've ever done that and you've looked at what happens to the water, that's as the ice tends to melt, you get those little you can see the water falling to the bottom, and that's because water is most dense at about 3 to 4 degrees. So as the water starts to melt, it's really dense and heavy and falls to the bottom. And then as water gets warmer again, and you can see on this graph, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So you've got this maximum density here at about 4, ice is less dense, and then water gets less dense as it gets warmer. And all of this will become apparent as to why this is important in a little while. So you've got this weird substance, it's a liquid, it's heaviest when it's cold, it's lighter when it's frozen, and lighter as it gets warmer. The other thing that's really important in the story around rivers on fire is oxygen and the role oxygen plays in water systems. So oxygen is required for most aquatic life, but oxygen doesn't readily dissolve in water. So you have this oxygen not really very abundant in most aquatic systems. It gets into the system by flowing water. So if it's flowing over rapids, you can get oxygen entrained in water. But if you think about the percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere, what we're breathing in, it's about 21%. It's less than 1% within the water system. So it's not readily available to aquatic organisms anyway. So they have a whole heap of weird strategies of getting oxygen. Oxygen's, as I said, photosynthesis, plants and algae can increase oxygen, but really importantly, bacterial respiration and decomposition really can decrease oxygen in water systems. So if we remember those two things, and then we think about those and the way in which water behaves in the context of as water starts to get warmer under climate change or as a result of some of the impacts of bushfires. So my first case study was around bushfires, just quickly. Again, if we look at that little conceptual model, we've got anthropogenic impacts can increase the frequency of bushfires in a whole range of ways, but climate change through increasing temperatures, decreasing rainfall, changes catchment vegetation, ground cover, and can influence the frequency and intensity of bushfires. And you tend to get, after bushfires, this increase in ash and charcoal, decreased in forest litter, and we get water quality impacts in all our receiving rivers and streams from the catchments. So fire creates a situation where the leaf litter that would otherwise be on the catchment floor is turned into ash and charcoal. It usually rains at some point after fire, and all of that ash and charcoal gets washed into the waterways. Now this figure is from Cliff Dam from the University of New Mexico, where they followed the oxygen in the Rio Grande River prior to the bushfire, and you can see the black line. So this is 3 years of data in the Rio Grande prior to a bushfire, which is the red data. And you can see when the bushfire occurs and when you had rainfall, the oxygen level in that river drops really low, so down to 2 milligrams per litre in that first instance, and then you have a series of points in time when it's actually zero oxygen available in the river system. And what's driving that is the respiration. So all of that charcoal and ash is being, bacteria are using that carbon and they're consuming all of that oxygen to decompose it, sucking all the oxygen out of the water system. And with no oxygen, many fish and other aquatic organisms don't survive. And so you get fish kills. And we've seen exactly the same situation in Australia after the summer bushfires. When the rain came, there was these black sort of really sooty slugs of water and there were fish kills associated with it. And that's a really common occurrence. It was seen in Canberra after the Canberra bushfires. It was seen again around Melbourne after the Melbourne bushfires. So again, it's water quality is playing, I guess, the key point here at the end. It's water quality changes that are causing the fish deaths, but the water quality is changing because of what's happened in the catchment. So if we want to think of the other way in which rivers are burning up, it's drought and an increased frequency and extent of drought. So again, climate change, which is one of the anthropogenic impacts, but you have water resource development playing out in the same space, increased drying of rivers and pools, and here we get what we call thermal stratification, which is where the water density starts to play out, and we'll talk a bit about that, and the water quality impacts, which are the final things that cause the death and destruction. So we think about what's been happening in the Murray-Darling Basin in the past 20 odd years. These are just downloaded from the BOM. You can see the annual mean temperature anomaly in the Murray-Darling Basin since about 1995 has always been in the positive based on the long-term average. So you've got hotter temperatures, hotter air temperatures. And you can see the two droughts from 2000, so the Millennium Drought and then the most recent drought on the second, which is the annual rainfall anomaly graph. So rainfall's been really low since 2000 comparative to the long-term average, and air temperatures have been much higher. So these two things together mean you end up with, as the droughts hit, the river pools are drying, but they're also getting a lot hotter, and this causes problems with water quality. So I'm going to use the fish kill study because it was so dramatic and everybody's heard about it, and just show you the images that end up with what happened with those fish kills in the Darling as just one example of what happens when rivers dry and you get fish kills all over the country. So in this particular case study of the fish kills around Menindee, Menindee is a large set of lakes in the lower Darling River, which is part of the Murray-Darling Basin. The Menindee lakes are great recruitment and breeding habitats for many native fish. They're big wetland areas, so when they hold water, fish think they're awesome. Lots of breeding, recruitment, spawning. And so in 2016, there was flow events down the Darling River. You had the wetlands filled. You had lots of fish using those wetlands to spawn and then recruit. And so you had big populations of fish in those wetlands. Fish were pretty happy. There was lots of water around and everything was, I guess, hunky-dory in fishland. In 2017 and 18, the water, the flows in the river system feeding the Menindee Lake started to decline. There wasn't that much rainfall. The Menindee Lake still contained water, but eventually the water drains back into the weirs. Part of this is managed water movement, and part of it's just where the system, how it drains through. So fish that were quite happy out here in these big wetlands ended up in river pools as the water drained back in. So you had all these healthy fish that had bred up during the previous year back in these river pools. Lots of fish, lots of water, still pretty happy. There's still enough food and the water quality is okay. But as we started to get into late 2018, the river channels are really drying and we've got these really high air temperatures. These river pools start to do what's called thermally stratify. So on the little graphic down here that's got all the fish shoved into the top layer of the water, this is where we have our hot, less dense water sitting on top of our colder, more dense water at the bottom. The weird behavior of water is causing this. The fact that when water's cold, it's heavier, it sits at the bottom. And the bottom water's got lots of respiration in it because there's not much oxygen. You don't have photosynthesis for the algae. So it turns into a pretty nasty, deoxygenated, decomposing mess, really. So it's cold water with zero oxygen at the bottom and lots of bacterial respiration occurring. And then, of course, at the end of 2018 into 2019, a few different events happened, probably related to storm events that moved across the system. And when the storm hits these very heavily stratified weir pools, it can cause them to what we call flip. So all that deoxygenated water ends up all the way through the water column and the fish have no oxygen. Oxygen's not very prevalent anyway in a lot of systems, just because of the nature of oxygen, and when it gets sucked out by respiration from all the bacteria, the fish just can't do anything and you get these mass fish deaths. They basically suffocate. And that system's a little bit self-perpetuating because as the fish then die, they drop to the bottom of the pool, and then when the thing all settles a bit, you get the sun heating the pool up, it will re-stratify. All the dead fish become great candidates for bacterial decomposition, and you get reduced oxygen again in the bottom of the pool. So until you get river flow, this thing can just repeat itself every time the system turns over because you get stratification building up. So in both of those instances, it's really just related to the fact that it's a water quality change, but driven by these broader catchment changes and anthropogenic influences. So just to sort of summarize those key points, rivers really reflect the condition of their catchments. So whatever happens in their catchments, both in terms of anthropogenic changes such as land use change and other things, or the impacts of climate change by drying and increasing bushfires, it will have an effect on the river systems. And those sort of things, those, you know, the effect of those broader scale changes are increased drought and frequencies of bushfires. And the associated water quality changes will have poor outcomes for rivers and streams. And I guess the point about increased frequency is that these events disappear. We've now got flows going down the Darling. The populations of fish around Menindee lakes have been really decreased. We've just recently done some surveys on the Darling of freshwater mussels. I noticed Nicole McCuskers in the audience, so she can chat in as well. Nicole observed some massive deaths, you know, maybe greater than 90% of freshwater mussels on the system. They will bounce back. You will get increased recruitment and things will start to repopulate these water holes. But I guess the question we need to ask ourselves in the context of will they cope is if we end up with another big drought and another thing in 5 years' time, then the populations haven't bounced back to the higher levels and things start to look pretty dire for huge areas of our river systems. Exactly the same with bushfires. If you get increased frequency and you get those oxygen sags frequent enough, things can't repopulate areas and you get desert environments in a river system, if you know what I mean. So that was my summary. So I think I've made my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fran. I might just get you to hold your slides there as well, just in case you want to refer back to them.
Yep.
Any of the questions that we've got. We've got some great interaction on the chat, so I'm going to just go over a few of those, and then I'll hand back over to Eva and she'll do the group chat for anything that hasn't been covered. So I think we had Kath Broderick, who said that this is the most clear explanation of deoxygenation after fire that she's ever seen. I have to agree with her there. It was your presentation was just made everything so easy to understand, and I think even those scientists those who are non-scientists amongst us would have found that really easy to understand, so thank you for that. How do you think that ash affects water quality in ephemeral rivers, especially where there might be significant time between a bushfire and an eventual flow? And that's from Erin.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty much going to affect it in the same way. And you find in ephemeral systems that just leaf litter itself can cause a very similar response. So as the systems are dry, you'll get leaf litter build up on the floor of a river or stream. And then when that flow comes through, it can wash all that leaf litter into pools. And we see events, what we call blackwater events, occurring after an extensive dry period. That leaf litter itself just gets washed into the stream, causes a massive bacterial respiration response. It's all decomposing the leaf litter, and you'll get fish deaths associated with that. So the difference with ash is it's a little bit more recalcitrant. It's had all the goody part of the carbon taken out of it, but it can still cause the same thing. If it lies around long enough on a dry riverbed or in the catchment, when you get rainfall and flow, it will wash it into the same point.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Kelly asked about, other than a flood, what else might cause destratification? And then Klaus actually helped answer that. And he said things like velocity, wind stress, convective cooling, those sorts of things. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so just a weird thing about that fish kills in the Menindee Lakes, what we actually think went on there, which again goes back to my weird little diagram of how water changes its density. That very heavy stratification, there was a storm event that came through just, like a cold front event towards Menindee, and the air temperature dropped quite significantly very quickly. Now, water would respond by actually the surface water would have suddenly become quite heavy compared to what it was, because it would have cooled and heavier, and water just gets heavier when it cools. And what the cooling of the surface, so you've got cold water sitting above hot water, sitting above cold water with the wind, made it tip. So you get these really tipping events where basically the water just flips over, in a sense. That's one thing that can happen. The other thing, earthquakes can cause destratification, minor earth tremors, a whole range of things. But it's usually flow, wind, and just seasonal changing of air temperature that causes destratification.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Now, Janine has asked, in the wake of recent bushfires, what could the government have done better in regards to responding to managing the subsequent effects on water quality for those receiving waters? And what are some short-term actions that can be taken to better manage these sites?
Look, I think it's, from a management context, it's very difficult. I mean, you've got large catchments that have burnt, and you can't sort of barricade rivers from their catchments. I mean, they need the water flow as well after a drought. So again, I guess it's trying to manage it as a whole system rather than just the river systems, would be my take on it. Managing the frequency and severity of bushfires and looking around at that different management responses to bushfires. I mean, the rivers in Australia, bushfires have been around, as Brad said, there's been bushfires for a long time, but of different scales and different magnitudes. And those big, devastating, massive bushfires obviously have a bigger impact on rivers than smaller bushfires. That only a proportion of the catchment might be burnt, not the entire catchment, I think. But you can't really protect a river from its catchment. That's just, they're linked.
Yeah, okay, interesting. All right, one last question before I hand back to Eva, and it's from Alicia Stewart. She says, hi Fran, thanks for your great talk. Do you know of any aquatic biota that may actually benefit from the impacts of bushfire? Are there any exotic species, for example?
Yeah, no, Alicia, I don't know of anything that, I mean, in terms of an aquatic beast, I mean, we know carp cope much better at low oxygen levels in systems, and so you may have a disproportionate effect on native fish compared to carp. In systems where carp are there, they might survive some of that sort of black water event, and there might be other organisms. Anything that could survive the deoxygenation would actually probably have a slightly better advantage in bouncing back, but not off the top of my head. Apart from, I think carp survive most things, unfortunately.
Yeah, dirty carp.
If they can air gulp, they're usually a bit better than if they survive, if they really require oxygen from the water column.
Yeah. So if anyone perhaps, sorry, Alicia, you go.
Oh, I was just wondering, worldwide, are there any species that might benefit, and then the potential for them to become, I don't know, if they came to Australia to be recolonising after bushfires, if they were let loose?
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, from a fish perspective, it'd have to be things that can cope really well with really low oxygen, I think. And then they'd have an advantage when things settle down.
No other invertebrates, really?
I don't know, no. Well, I mean, invertebrates are a weird bunch, as you know, so quite a few of them are actually air breathers, and so they can actually come back and colonise quite quickly.
So perhaps if anyone knows of any species in particular, that you can share that in the chat. We can distribute that later. All right, so I'm going to hand back to Eva. So just give me a moment and I'm going to...
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, I think I'll automatically stop you anyway. There we go. All right, Eva, are you back with us?
Yep. Thanks, Jack. Thank you, Fran and Bradley. Those were amazing presentations. Different, but still along the theme of Rivers on Fire. And I was just plowing through the chat, and basically there's a number of questions. People are really wanting to know what we could do now, which I'll throw out later on for the broader networking discussion. So we have about 20 minutes to do this general discussion. But before we start, what we would like to do, if Jackie could flick on the next one, we would like to offer you the opportunity to tell us the next topic for our next RiverTalk series, which is next month. We would like to run a poll. And basically, this is based on the principle that you ask us the questions. We will find the best speaker we could, and we will put them on to RiverTalk next time. So there are some topics there that are being put forth. You could see that the poll is actually running. Jack, I'm assuming everybody could see the poll. All right. So we have at the moment, there's an science communications, valuation of the rivers, rivers and mining, ongoing restoration of rivers during COVID, which is a very interesting topic. Valuation of rivers is actually leading at the moment, followed very closely by ongoing restoration of rivers during COVID-19. That will be such a good topic as well. So we might run it for just a few minutes so we get everybody of our audience addressing. Sorry, Jack.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we've got 80 out of 113 voted. So
yes, we got 75%. So we'd like to get everyone there. So our monthly RiverTalk aims to present a speaker. So today is our special one. We have 2 speakers today, but most if not all of our monthly RiverTalks now will actually only have 1 designated speaker. So we really would like to encourage you to join us again every month. But in addition to that, I'll talk more about other activities that IRF would like to share with you as well. So we're getting there, we're getting close. Jack, we might close it once we have most already responding. So there are, just looking through the chat, there are a number of questions that are on the chat too. So I will be asking Jackie and Sylvia to help me out. Really interesting. There's a number of sharing presentations and other references that we would like to distribute to the attendees after this event, right? So we've stopped it, right, Jack? So we have 47% actually would like to hear about the valuation of rivers. And when we talk about evaluation, I'm assuming this is both the natural intrinsic value as well as, you know, the economic value of rivers. So we will we will try our very best to find a good speaker for that topic. And the other one is about the ongoing restoration of rivers during COVID-19. What are the challenges that we as river practitioners actually face in light of COVID-19? I know with the social distancing issue, I've spoken to a few of our stakeholders who are meant to be face-to-face with the community, and that has been fairly limited. And technology, and in some cases, really is not applicable to some of our stakeholders out there who actually don't want to use technology, as in Zoom or any other online forums. So a couple of them actually, I want to share this. This is really good. A couple of them actually had to resort back to just doing the whole letter writing, sending things on the mail. There is no other way to basically reach out with the whole restrictions around. But, we'll talk more about this. Those are very good topics, as well as the other ones, rivers and mining and science communications, that we will put forth for you. We will do this every RiverTalk. We will invite your suggestions in terms of the topic. With that, let me just go through I would like to open this up now for chats and other comments. And if there's any relevant ones, I'd like to throw it to our speakers as well. So the main question is around, of course, Lisa, I think this is during Brad's presentation, said, I see science education for Aboriginal students a key part of creating a bigger voice. Bradley, this is probably for you. I teach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in tertiary science at Melbourne, and there are some amazing voices coming through. Lisa would love to hear more about what Bradley you're doing in STEM ed space, as Lisa would love to find ways to connect with them with opportunities to build their profile and their skills as upcoming scientists. So Bradley, over to you, Brad.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had to think about that. I saw Lisa's question, and I think allowing the opportunity for Aboriginal people to take the space, but also giving them hope that science is a pathway that they can actually take on. Last year I was involved with Uni of Melbourne and Professor Marcia Langton, and I got involved in writing some curricula for the Australian curricula on Indigenous knowledge and water. And so out of that came a bunch of resources for water, fire, and astronomy. So that was really cool to be a part of. And that obviously goes to teachers then, because the years that I had to target in water was year 5 and 6 and 9 and 10, I think it was. So I actually got my son to peer review the year 10 stuff for me, because he was in year 10, which was perfect. And, some of the stuff that was in there, he's just sort of said, that'd be cool to do. I'd love to do this. And that sort of gives them the idea that they have an opportunity to lead in this space. And that's the thing that is missing, and especially around curricula, whether that's school or university curricula, the way it's taught, is bringing Indigenous methodologies into the way we think about and how we teach science, and I think bringing traditional knowledge as part of this, I think, is a good way. And, that's just one resource that's out there available for free for teachers, so I suppose to a point, teachers now have no excuse, it's all written down there. All they got to do is write the lesson plan. But also the opportunity for Indigenous people to influence science in general. So I've been trying to work with the science fraternity. So I worked with the Academy of Science on their reconciliation action plan. And out of that, they've created opportunities. So it's making science a bit more sexier for Indigenous people, if you know what I mean. So, there's an Indigenous Researcher Travel Award at the Academy. There's obviously the alumni at universities, and also the CSIRO STEM Award, Indigenous STEM Award. So there's these sort of opportunities that are giving Indigenous people hope, but we need to go a bit further than that. And I think what it is, we have the National Science Strategy, which mentions Indigenous people in regards to they should do STEM like women. That's it. So that sort of stuff needs to change. We need to influence that, change that. We don't have any advisory roles. We don't have any strategies. So I suppose they're the gaps that we need to fill right now. And then my other hope is trying to build an Indigenous science network. So working with the Academy of Science as well, hopefully into the near future, once we're allowed to talk to people face to face again. It is obviously build that network, and then that network can then create opportunities, give support to other Indigenous people or students that are, that may be questioning why they're doing science, but they're doing science because they love it. They don't think they should be. So, it's giving them the hope that science or STEM can be a career pathway. Big question. Love it.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. There is also a question for Fran, and I've got a couple more follow-ups on that one too, Brad. I like the term sexy science though. That's pretty cool. We'll talk more about that. I've got a few more reactions here. Fran, there is a question there about how could we possibly incorporate, so this is from Jenny Riches, how can the impact of fire be better reflected in water models that inform interventions and management? What are the core research and development gaps that need to be filled? Because most of our models probably won't have fire in there. It might have temperature, but I'll leave that over to you, Fran, to respond.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess most river models are based on understanding runoff. And so fire is just one of the things that influences runoff. If you burn out all the ground cover and change the catchment vegetation, you increase your runoff, the same as clearing charging out and clearing it with a bulldozer. I think it's more to the fact being able to run scenarios. So where you've actually got river models built, being able to run scenarios where you change the runoff to reflect a burnt catchment and looking at what impact that actually has on the river system is the way in which you'd probably better help management. And that's exactly the way, if you have a model, a hydrological model that you can scenario different scenarios of climate change is also useful for management. So I think the base point is having some really robust hydrological models around the country, which we do in some parts and we don't in other parts. And so our ability to scenario can sometimes be a bit lacking. And I think that's because it's very difficult. Bushfires aren't things you can predict in many instances. So it's it's happened. What has that impact been? But if you had a model that you could put a scenario across that, 50% of the catchment's burnt in this place or 20%, and then look at how that actually changed things from a water quantity perspective, and then looking at what would happen from a water quality perspective. So I think it's joining up that quantity. Bushfires often mean you've got more water coming in because the catchment's initially cleared. Post the bushfire, you can have less water coming in because the vegetation tends to suck up a lot of that water as it regrows. So you've sort of got this balancing act over long term. They actually monitored that after the Canberra bushfires. You had a decrease in the amount of water that was then ending up in the stream as the vegetation sucked all the water up to grow. So it's scenarios, I think, is the big lack from what my thoughts.
Thanks, Fran. And I'm assuming as well, any validation, right, in relation to your conceptual diagram, water quality, and for example, the ash flow from the catchment and so on. So for Brad, there is another question here. From your knowledge, from Christy, this is from Christy, do you think riparian zones were burnt using cool mosaic burning pre-colonization? There is a perception that riparian zones did not burn in the past, and therefore fire is not part of current riparian management practice and care. If fire was used, how do you think that would have been practiced?
Oh, good question. As I mentioned, I'm not a fire expert, so I don't really, I'm not in a position to answer that one. I think there's other people I could probably take that on notice for sure and ask a few people I know and ask that question to them and try and get back to the group somehow. Maybe get an answer through you to you, Eva, because I wouldn't have a clue how to answer that. But it does seem to make sense that they'd probably keep away from the riparian zones.
That's
Can
right.
I just jump in though too, Brad? Many of the trees in riparian zones are not fire tolerant. So that would suggest that long-term riparian zones probably haven't been burnt. And I think you can look at the vegetation and the traits of the vegetation and see where trees just don't survive fire. They're unlikely to have had frequent fire.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes.
Yeah.
And they're naturally wetter, so they're less likely to burn anyway. So.
Thank you. So we will try and share, if there's any more information from both Bradley and Fran on this one, we will share that with you. Brad, just to continue on, is there a national group, and this is from Lisa again, is there a national group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander scientists?
Hang on, I'm freezing. Hang on. I didn't quite get that.
My students are forming a student level group from Lisa's perspective, and I'm assuming he answered that already, Lisa. This is about having the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander National Group of Scientists. Brad?
Yeah, I like my internet, like myself, the internet connection become unstable. So I only got half of your question. Sorry.
That's all right.
I think it was relating to Lisa's question.
Yeah, it was about.
I might turn my video off, see if that makes me better.
So, Brad, this is about a national group of Indigenous and Torres Strait Island scientists.
Yeah, look, I think that's an opportunity. I reckon my kids are awake. Okay, good. I reckon my kids are awake because the internet just lagged.
That's right, we could hear you.
Yeah, look, that is the hope and dreams. There was one started on LinkedIn a number of probably about 15 years ago, and there was all three or four of us. But I think this space we are growing, and the time is right to create an Indigenous science network. Otherwise, we're just going to fall behind and be left behind in this space. So I think the opportunity is now, and hopefully once we get back to normal life, potentially this could be the norm, but I'm hoping that, that the Indigenous Science Network can be created and opportunities can happen, because, it's more about providing support for people in that space. When I think back to when I was doing my, undergrad in science, and, I was it. I started off doing geology. I was the only Aboriginal person, and there was 2 women doing geology. So back in that day, there was the minorities were prevalent in that space. But now I think that has changed. And I think someone mentioned the CSIRO Indigenous STEM opportunities for students. We've got the Girls Academy, Indigenous STEM Girls Academy. My son is a boy, so he can't do that. So I suppose that's half the gap looked after, which is unfortunate. But that's, at the moment, they are great opportunities for Indigenous girls to create. And, I've tried to get my son in other STEM programs. His name is ideal for STEM. We have Bill Nye, the science guy. His name is Kai. So Kai, the science guy, is perfect. But he doesn't like that at all as a teenager. But there definitely are more opportunities these days, and I think we just need to build on that to make it a supportive fraternity of scientists. We want non-Indigenous scientists helping us and mentoring. When I was at CSIRO a number of years ago, I was looking for an Indigenous science mentor. I'm still looking for one, and now probably more than likely I'll become the mentor rather than the mentee. And like Fran has a brilliant Indigenous scientist coming through under her wing, and Michelle is going to do great things, and hopefully she can excel in that space. She's doing some stuff with the mussels and Indigenous knowledge. So it's we are growing in numbers, but we just need to own that space ourselves as well, but also have the support behind us.
Yep, that's great. There is also, thank you for that, Brad. And yes, we could hear you loud and clear despite not sharing your screen, but we've seen you already, so that's okay. There is a question here from,
cool.
There are actually a number of questions, and I'm wading through that as fast as I can. Russell, one of the major impacts of fires for river models is the subsequent regrowth after fires. This is probably more your alley, Fran. The regrowth has implications for runoff for several years after. So as Fran mentioned, there was a significant impact on inflows in Canberra dams after the fires. So the question, I think, which, you know, some of us would have in our mind, how long would this last? And I know there is an emphasis for monitoring, right? And making sure we know the river, when the river will actually recover.
I mean, Russell may want to join in here, but I mean, I think in the Canberra fires, I've forgotten exactly, but I think they modelled that it would be well above 10, 15, even 20 years impact. I mean, the vegetation takes a long time to re-establish, and it will be growing quite rapidly for quite some time. So, you know, these sags in inflow, because it's held in catchment, will have significant impacts on water availability. And I think you'll start to see that modelling happening around the Sydney catchments after the recent fires. They'll be really looking carefully at what the inflows into some of the Sydney water catchment dams are since the fires. So I think our understanding of that on a broad scale is only beginning. I think we probably never previously had the detailed models to understand what was happening. So yeah, emerging area, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Philip's actually responded to that as well. He said it could be up to 150 years. So yeah, significant amounts of time.
We're really looking at 150 years, and in mixed species, about 10 to 20 years. We have a number of questions still, and we will try and see what we could do after the event on this one. I'll talk to Jackie and Sylvia and our two speakers, how we could respond to these questions. But I'd like to, we have a few more minutes, and I'd like to give both Fran and Bradley an opportunity to answer. I think if I could summarize a number of questions that have been raised, it's really around what can we do? What can we do now? Brad, for you, how can Indigenous people be more involved? How could we get involved? You've captured that already by talking about giving the science a voice. Fran, I would also throw the same question to you. What can we do? What can we do for our rivers and our river communities on this one? Brad, I might start with you, and then I'll hand over to Fran after.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. Oh, look, I think I mentioned before is you know what, if your organisation has a reconciliation action plan, see what that says, and are you achieving that for Indigenous people in your partnership? But also the other one was more about, you know, if you're starting a project and you think about the opportunities you have in this project in changing the landscape for the better, or improving the landscape, or remediating the landscape, make sure you include Indigenous people up front if you can, because as I said, you know, we don't want to be an afterthought. We're tired of that, and we don't want to be out of scope because the consultant didn't have it in their terms of reference. So I think that's important to make sure it's all up front. And obviously, if you are talking about Indigenous knowledge and values and opportunities, and there's no Indigenous people in the room, be the brave one to ask why. Mm-hmm. Ask that question of why aren't Aboriginal people in the room, and how can we get them in the room? And I think, you know, there are some basic protocols out there. There's research protocols, but also just thought of a really cool thing. Think about research. You know, as a researcher, you're going out with a question you want answered. Uh-huh. Build a relationship with an Indigenous community and ask them what are their questions they want answered for once. Rather than them being the researched or answering the questions for you, have them build the question so you have a co-designed, co-developed, co-authored opportunity for them to be part of it from the start to finish. They become co-authors. They are proud of that. You know, there's nothing more than seeing the elders smile when they see themselves on videos or on papers, and, you know, their names mentioned here and there. You know, that's a real I get a real buzz out of that. Mm. And I think if there's more of those opportunities, the better. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Fran?
So I guess the way forward, I mean, I think I'm a bit of a fan of the well-designed long-term monitoring programs that are built into some sort of adaptive management framework. So work out, you know, monitor things that actually are going to show an impact from whatever you're looking at. Include water quality, water quantity, and as well as that biotic indicators, but then embed that in some kind of framework where you actually feed back to managers so they can do something about it. I think we have a history of starting monitoring programs and not probably monitoring what we should be monitoring. They don't tend to show any changes, so we just abandon them. rather than looking at them and going, well, are we measuring the right things for the disturbances that we've got in our catchments? And if we do start to measure the right things, who's going to do something about it when they start to show an impact? So, I think we could, coming from Southeast Queensland, and I know Eva will smile, but the Southeast Queensland Ecosystem Health Monitoring Framework that's now been going for nearly 20 years is the longest monitoring framework we have in the country. And it means that you can actually show some impacts and you can actually go back and tweak the management and do things. So I think that as an underlying thing across the country would be quite useful. And then on top of that, you need the specific spearheaded research and development projects that go in and actually really look at what the impacts of, say, a really bad bushfire is, or what happens when you do get your riparian zone burnt. So you need the well-designed research as well. But nothing goes, if we had the really good monitoring programs, we'd have a really good suite of data sets to be starting to ask some good questions of. That's me.
Thank you, Fran. What Brad and Fran have captured is really our desire and our vision to actually have resilient rivers, whether it's from floods or from bushfires or from any drastic events out there. And we talk about COVID as well, so we really are aiming for resilient rivers, but Brad captured it. We're not just talking about the rivers in an environmental perspective. We're really looking at the soul and the communities that are looking after the river, giving them a voice as well, because that's what we need. We need all of these components to actually develop resilient rivers. And in due course, the IRF would like to talk more about our Resilient Rivers Blueprint that we are still developing at this stage. And I'm pretty sure we would like to encourage everybody to get involved in that one. So this is actually my thank you spiel, my thank you time for all of you. I would like to thank all of the participants. Your participation has been very overwhelming for myself and the team. As I said, this is our first one. Thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for your interest. And I would also like to say a special thank you to Bradley and Fran. You stuck by us during these uncertain times. Thank you for agreeing to do this online sharing with us. We are so grateful for your time, for your time with us. So apart from River Talks, we have other events as well. As I said, we have River Dialogues, where we will be talking more about this Rivers on Fire theme. Now, River Dialogues are longer. They would consist of 2 half-day sessions. And we are actually holding the next River Dialogue in June. Keep posted for that in partnership with Charles Sturt University. I would like to acknowledge some members of the university who are here joining us. And we look forward to actually planning River Dialogue, Rivers on Fire as a theme in June with them. And if you could stay tuned for that one as well. So the River Dialogue will actually delve deeper into what we talked about today. What is the call for action? What do we do? What are the detailed monitoring programs that we can look at? How could we tweak them? How could we tweak our current models now? And more importantly, how could we embrace the community and ensure that we actually achieve resilience in the community? In addition to our river streaming program, which is our River Talks and a River Dialogue, we are also launching a very exciting program, River Academy. And Jackie is our lead person on that one. It's an interactive online learning platform where environmental professionals can expand their knowledge by enrolling in any number of online courses managed by the International River Foundation. So for those of you who would have heard of what verifiable micro-credential or digital badge programs, we're developing that for rivers and river managers and river champions. So it is exciting, it is innovative, and we're just literally scoping this as we speak. And we will use this River Talk series to share any updates with you in relation to our new programs, whether it's River Dialogue or our River Academy. So with that, and on behalf of the IRF team, we have Jackie, who you have heard, Sylvia, Kelly, Marion, and Ip. We would like to thank you again for attending today, and we really look forward to seeing you again online for our next River Talk on Wednesday, the 20th of May. So please mark that in your respective calendars, okay? We will try and get a good speaker for that day. Well, we will definitely get a good speaker for that day, not try. We will get you a good speaker for that day. So thank you, everyone, and stay tuned and stay safe and take care, everyone. From IRF, thank you very much. Bye for now.